I went to Ohav Shalom Synagogue on Friday night for their Shabbat service, and that's where Aaron Bisnow's the rabbi. He's the interim rabbi for 18 months or 2 years, and asked me to speak about interfaith work. Once a month, a guest speaker comes in, and it was a really interesting experience because, for many reasons, one of which is at supper before they were talking about, do you know this is the only shul or synagogue I've ever been a part of that starts on time? And it was true. At 7 o'clock on the dot, worship started. And every other synagogue I've been around, it feels more like Calvary, where it's 5 after and people are on the elevator and they're coming up. And if you count right at 11, there's nobody here, but you wait 10 minutes and everybody seems to show up. Really fascinating experience, as you would guess. They love him there. They appreciated me being there and kind of see us in action together. Now we get what you're doing with those Christians. And they had heard stories about Calvary, but to put a name to a face and all that was a good instructive exercise for us all. I will also note that when Aaron's here, we get through one verse. You notice that? We spent an hour on one verse a few weeks ago. We're going to try really hard to finish chapters 11 and 12 today. I think we can. And that finishes the Book of Ecclesiastes, because the next 4 weeks is a perfect timing to do the Book of Philippians, which I've wanted to teach for a while. Completely different vibe, energy, direction, and so on, to be able to contrast that. Just have another piece to throw in there. I hope Aaron's able to join us a couple more times coming soon. So chapter 11 continues the collection of what are called epigrams. They're short, pithy sayings, often said in a clever or funny way. As you would guess, they're funnier in Hebrew than they are in English. Something is lost in translation. So the first, chapter 11, verse 1, send out your bread upon the waters, for after many days you will get it back. Divide your means 7 ways, or even 8, for you do not know what disaster may happen on earth. Cast your bread upon the waters at the time, kind of within the larger near Middle East, was a very common saying, not just Jewish. If you live generously, don't hoard everything, share what you've got with other people. Sometimes when you throw it out there, it'll do some good in the world. And there was some type, I don't know about expectation, but hope built into that. If you cast your bread upon the waters, you'll get back at least that much in goodwill or some type of return. Sowing seeds would be a similar type of analogy, but cast your bread upon the waters. I've used that many times myself, not even thinking this is where it comes from. Verse 1 and 2 together seem to be a way of very practical advice on diversifying your investments. Divide your means 7 ways. Don't put it all into one stock. Don't buy all gold. That's really the wisdom. It's quite literal of what he's talking about is all the stuff you have, don't put all your eggs in one basket, is how we would say that. But here is something really, did you notice divide your means 7 ways or even 8? Do we talk like that? We'll say that again. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. There is a type of speech in Hebrew called it, I did not know this before I did the research, graded numerical dictum, or graded numerical sequence, or numerical proverb. It's used in 38 places in the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. And that is, it's meant to be suggestive of this is open-ended. If there are, divide your means 7 ways, or even 8, that means way more than 7, but at least 7. Oh, and 8 is, oh yeah, I thought of one other thing. There are 3 things wrong with the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. Well, 4 if you think about it. They don't have a quarterback. their offensive line has no depth, they need a defensive tackle, and oh yeah, the coach never wins a playoff game. And well, you know, there are a lot more than 4 or 5 if I start thinking about it. That's the whole point. So divide your means, your assets, 7 ways. Actually divide it as many as makes sense for you. Isn't that cool? Do we have something like that in English? Just generically, don't put all your eggs in one basket. Verses 3 and 4 are a chiasm, a literary device repeating ideas in reverse order. And this, again, in Hebrew is much more readily apparent. When clouds are full, they empty rain on the earth. Whether a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. Is that not the most obvious thing? That's like, I think he's been drinking again when he's writing this, or he's become a little old and crazy at this point. Whoever observes the wind will not sow. Whoever regards the crowds will not reap. That is very weird. But it starts with rain, A, B, wind in the fallen tree. The wind knocked the tree over. B is wind, and then A is rain from the clouds. That's the thing there. It's just a strange way for us to think about it. It probably means, this I've read a bunch of different commentaries, probably means nature is unpredictable, but we have to live with the consequences, whatever they are. Going back to the earlier wisdom, if you're living with the consequences of nature, highly unpredictable, it's better to diversify your investments. It's better to cast your bread upon the waters, and therefore you're protecting yourself from all the uncertainties of the world, which is a really smart idea, particularly as we're thinking about 5 years since the pandemic started. I'm betting if you wanted to be really rich, 6 years ago, invest more in Amazon and Zoom, and you did really well. Some in-person businesses, not so well. Verses 5 through 6, just as you do not know how the breath comes to the bones in the mother's womb, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. So it's mysterious. In the morning, sow your seed. In the evening, do not let your hands be idle, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both will be alike. We don't know the future. If you sow your seed, any of you garden in here? How many, what do you have to do to make a plant grow? Yell at it. I believe that's called a brown thumb that you have there, Allison. But if you've got a greenish thumb, how do you make a plant grow? Well, the short answer is you can't. But you help provide the conditions for it to do what it naturally does. It needs water, it needs sunlight, it needs nutrients in the soil. You got to protect it from pests as much as possible, and not too much water or too little water. But you can't make a thing grow. Similar to, by the way, how a church works, no priest can come in and make it grow. You try your best to do all the regular things, and that's what things a church or business can do naturally, if all that. Jeffrey? That's the whole point. It's the same thing in the spiritual life. You prepare the conditions for growth, but you can't really control whether it grows or not. How one gets healthy, which is partly what I'm talking about in the sermon today. You can't make that happen, but you've got to prepare the thing, protect from certain things, and work towards other things. Interestingly, so these epigrams, these pithy sayings, or not even pithy, like some of them are kind of lame. That ends, light is sweet and is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. Light and the sun are ancient metaphors for life, good living. So it doesn't say much, but it's more, it feels like this guy, here's some stuff I had in my journal that when I was younger, I looked up these quotes and thought they were very cool, so I added them in there. And like when he was 15, these were cool things. I remember I read Catcher in the Rye when I was 15 and thought it was so awesome. And I went back and read it a few years ago. I was like, oh, it's not that great anymore. But at the time, maybe it was. So verse, is that 7? The final chapter 11, verse 7 through chapter 12, verse 8 is viewed as one long poem, or at least poetic set of sayings together. So that last section of epigrams ended, and then thus begins the poem on age youth. And it's really fascinating to read this. And then the very end of the book is 2 epilogues. It's really clear. There's epilogue 1, written by somebody different. Kohelet, remember, is not the author. There's an unknown, anonymous author writing. He's in first person. Then it switches to third person, this epilogue, and then it switches to another one. They're clearly 2 different people. And we'll get to that in just a moment. Rejoice in the light because of why? Why would you, if you're on verse 7 and 8 here? According to Kohelet, the writer of all the Ecclesiastes, think of all the stuff we read. If you rejoice, why should you rejoice in the light now when it's light out? Because it's going to be dark awfully soon. We had an extra hour of light in the night, but yeah, it's dark earlier. It's in the morning. We have to deal with what we've got, so you may as well enjoy what you have when you can. The next one, this is easily PG-13. So sorry if I get in trouble for saying this. Verse 9, rejoice, young man, while you are young, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Follow the inclination of your heart and the desire of your eyes. What's he talking about? Good, honest sports? No, he's talking about women. And he's like, he's not a prude. I'll just say it that way. While you still can, you should get at it, is basically what he's saying there, which is a little weird for us to think about. The days are coming when young women will no longer notice you. You can't throw the game-winning touchdown in the state championship anymore. Your big shot will have passed you by. How many people are full of regret, men, women of whatever age, because, I didn't take my chances when I could have? Kohelet is very much saying, when you're young, you need to sow your seeds. That's over there. Metaphorically, I'm talking about. Experience life while you can. Metaphorically, Charles, that's what we're talking about here. But I think he's talking about, you should go experience life. Because remember, he did. That's what he told us from the beginning of the book. If you're going to go experience life, I was the best at doing it. I had the most slaves, the most stuff, the most houses, the most women, the gardens, and I needed, pools to water all the vineyards, and one after another. I experienced all these, and I drank, remember that at the very beginning? And then I tried wisdom. So all the things you could do. So he's saying, hey, you may as well, okay.
However, the end of verse 9 is bringing this into kind of sharp clarity. Go ahead, enjoy it all. We're going to be judged. Just know that now. And so then when it follows it up in verse 10 with banish anxiety from your mind, it's like, well, how can you do that? What you're saying is go ahead and do it, even though it's all vanity, and you're going to be judged.
It's all vanity. All of it, even the wisdom in his mind, is vanity. Is he saying, I would say be careful of viewing this from middle-class 21st century American eyes. Are we being judged because of follow the sins of the eyes of your youth? I think it's everything. So having sex isn't the only thing he'd be judged for. All of it is vanity. None of it leads you anywhere really productive in the end. But, while you can, you should. I'm not saying this is a great way to build the contemporary ethic, or not what you should teach. Could you imagine to your children when they're 16? Maybe I wouldn't do this. He's not writing to his own child, he's writing to somebody else's children. It's much easier because you don't have to live with the consequences. At verse 10, as you're saying, banish anxiety from your mind and put away pain from your body, for youth and the dawn of life are vanity. wouldn't it be, also I'm talking about this in the sermon, if we could just banish anxiety from the mind? If we had, how much would you pay for a magic pill or the perfect prayer that just, like, you're healed? I've said this before, why we allow advertising for pharmaceuticals on television, I cannot understand. It seems like that should be taught, the person, their doctor, should talk about this, because they always list a gazillion crazy side effects that seem worse in many cases than what the thing fixes or heals. But imagine if we had that pill or that prayer with no side effects for a physical thing. How much money would that company make? Tons and tons. But imagine if we had that for emotional trauma, mental trauma, family trauma, all the rest, those other things. My God, that would be amazing. What's that? A wrinkle cream that works. Right. Remember, by the way, remember this when we get to the gospel lesson about the man who is sick for 38 years. All the things he must have tried. Sorry, what's that?
We have that. I've been thinking about this in the last couple of weeks.
Hymnody.
Because 99% of it will be, things are fine. Be still, my soul. We have the...
To banish anxiety, you mean?
Yeah. Things might be messed up, but don't worry about it because things are going to be okay.
Things might be messed up now, but don't worry about it, but because things are going to be okay.
Because God is in command, or you're in Jesus' hands, and that when you start to look through the hymnal in terms of what is the affect that's being conveyed, the overwhelming majority of texts are projecting a sense that we're within the hands of God and things will be okay.
Yeah, so if you couldn't hear, the overwhelming majority of the text, the words in the hymnal, are some form of living in hope that God is in charge, that we don't need to worry, have anxiety, because history is moving a direction. I agree with that and would say, well, that's because the hymns in the Episcopal hymnal are all suggested or directly influenced by the New Testament. And so what is markedly different from Kohelet and this piece of wisdom literature, which is probably 300 years before Jesus, give or take, it's remarkably different because the whole notion of the Christian faith, what Paul writes in Philippians, for example, or the Gospels, is history is headed in a direction. You'll see if you come to 11, the children are going to do a timeline, which is just a really cool thing. It's not specifically COVID related, but it lets the kids participate in worship, and I think it's really neat what they're doing. So they have a ribbon that's the whole history of the known world, 4+ billion years, and each little rib on this ribbon counts as 1,000 years. And it starts at the entrance of the church, and it's unrolled all the way, and it stops at the high altar. It just happened to be that long, by the way. And they tell the story of, here is where the dinosaurs were, here is where people appear. You know, it's really far down, and it's this tiny little blip, a couple inches in the entire ribbon. And here's Jesus, and here's COVID, not to minimize it, but also to put it in its context. And the very end is this white frayed ribbon. And the whole idea is the future is unwritten yet, but we call that parousia, which is, I wouldn't even say the end point. It's God is all in all. Is that the way of making sense of it? It is heaven come to earth. It's the kingdom of heaven. It's the restoration of the creation as God intends it. And it is unwritten except that God and humanity are reconciled and in union with one another, communion again. That's the end towards which history is heading. And so as Christians, we would live from hope well, does that mean I'm not going to get COVID? No, of course not. All the stuff that happens in life happens, but that there's meaning because there's a telos, there's an end to that you have an end in God, and that the whole of creation, the world, has a similar end of unification, reunification is a better word, together. Kohelet does not see it that way. Basic Judaism, it depends on what group you ask and when, is there resurrection or not? Pharisees said yes, Sadducees said no. When's the Messiah get here? Some of them when this happens, others when that happens. But that's part of why we separated as a part of branch of Judaism, because we think the Messiah is already here, and here's how. Jess?
This last line, I think it can be interpreted as like somewhat of a hopeful message in some way. Like,
Verse 10?
yeah, like don't worry, don't dwell on your pain. But I sort of see that, so anxiety can, if we didn't have anxiety at all, like we wouldn't learn from things.
Oh.
And if we didn't have pain, sometimes like, everything in moderation, but, we just like run into the fire, right? So anxiety and pain can actually be helpful.
Anxiety and pain could be helpful. One might even say they could just be bad if you let it sit there, or they can help us see things we would normally see. For example, one reason to have pain is if I have my hand on this hot stove, I don't notice that it's burning my hand up unless I pull it away. It doesn't mean pain in itself is good, but we can learn something good from that. And again, think of that in the context of the sermon later today. We've had 5 years blasted with anxiety and all these other emotions. And what did we learn from the last 5 years? How have you grown? What did you lose? What person, what people did you lose? What have you are thankful for? All that is wrapped up. Part of the point in the sermon, and I would dare say even here, is if you don't take a moment, more than a moment, don't take time to integrate the last 5 years into your life, we're missing something and we're diminished as people. It also have all this anxiety. Now, it doesn't mean to think about it all the time at all. I'm not suggesting that. But to take all that stuff I just mentioned, what did we learn, who do we lose, and so on, and integrate that into the larger story of who we are. I think Kohelet, to a degree, is doing some of that. Anxiety we can learn from, pain we can learn from, but here are things that are important. We would disagree, I believe, on what is important, but those can be helpful tools for us. Allison? We started appreciating things we took for granted, such as bus drivers. I would say one thing that I took for granted was how friendly the average, not that anybody's average in Pittsburgh, but the average Pittsburgh, how friendly the people are. And what happened very quickly, I remember the first time was so jarring. I was walking the dog outside, down the street, without a mask, and somebody, they must have been 40 or 50 feet away, yelled at me to get away from them because they were wearing a mask and I might infect them with my leprosy. And I'm not talking, I wasn't going to be right there. It was so far away and it was so angry, directed right at me, because I think that person was afraid and what could happen, and get it. But that was just, I took for granted that almost everybody on the street in Pittsburgh, hi, how are you? That was gone. It's now largely come back. Jeffrey, you had a point?
Yeah, another thing we take for granted, it's funny that I noticed it just this morning, I think, that we were, the bishop disallowed the common chalice.
The bishop disallowed the common chalice.
Which I, by the way, I haven't taken any in my work
Yeah.
like 30 some years.
Many dioceses, Christian churches all over the country, just said you may not worship in person. And I don't believe that a bishop has that authority to do so and would be willing to go to the mat for that. But I took worship in person with you for granted. And I don't say all this in the sermon, but I have held services during a massive blizzard in Kansas with like 18 inches of snow, with snow still falling. I have held services during a hurricane because I could walk over there. And when every other time, I had never canceled Sunday worship ever. And it was so weird to have to do that. And then we did it for a long time. A lot of those things that we took for granted, suddenly we couldn't do anymore. Like just to go outside or be with people, or have a meal out, or go to a movie, or like go to a soccer game with your kids, or go to work in person, a million things like that. Go to the grocery store. I remember watching the first video before we knew better how it was transmitted, how to sanitize the groceries that you had delivered to you. And like all these videos of, I remember, well, I guess I got to learn how to cut my own hair, at least for a while. And like that was kind of a cool skill to develop. But other stuff just got old. Charles, did you have a point?
The man who attacked you.
The man who attacked me. Verbally.
Why couldn't he have just crossed the street?
It was a woman. She could have crossed the street. I would have crossed the street. If you have a dog, you see another dog coming, almost every dog person, unless they know each other, you'll just cross or at least get out of the way. They just do that. I think it was the fear of the unknown. And it was, I call that COVID crazy. People just acted out in ways they would normally never do. But everybody's so amped up. Think of what, for goodness sakes, what's on the news now, but what was on then. It was constantly barraged with the unknown. You should be scared of that. So chapter 12 continues the same poem up through verse 8. Remember your Creator in your youth and what you're created for, which is what? What are you created for according to Kohelet? To enjoy the simple things in life while you can, because you're going to get old and things will get tougher. Sorry, everybody who's above 20 in this room. Before the days of trouble come and the years draw near when you will say, I have no pleasure in them. So he's saying, eventually, every man, and I'm betting every woman, becomes the guy standing on his yard with a hose, get off my lawn. Eventually, everybody becomes that. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return with rain, on the day when the guards of the house tremble and the strong men are bent, the women who grind cease working because they are few, and those who look through the windows see dimly when the doors on this. It's not obvious at all in English what he's talking about. These are, we see that this is addressed to a young man. Light and sun, like I mentioned before, metaphors for life. Live while you're still alive. Rejoice in the light, dark days surely come. So remember your Creator, because things are going to get tough. The sun and the moon darkening, the old traditional Jewish interpretation is one's vision is growing dim as one ages. People will grow old and frail, unlike their vigorous youth. When he says windows, what is he referring to? There's only one place in the whole Bible glass is mentioned, and it is second in value just after gold. This is not a window like these. What's that? Yes, it is. Well done, Allison. 1 Corinthians. These would be, if you could imagine a house in Middle East today, lattice covering a window, so a woman could look out without being seen by unrelated men. That's the basic idea. Verses 4 through 5, the continuous description of, this is all about bodily decay, this whole section in an allegorical way. Doors on the street being closed were understood referring to the deafness of the human, or hard of hearing as you get older. The sound of grinding traditionally refers to the digestive tract slowing down. The inability to sleep in the morning, he rises at the sound of a bird. Anything, going to the bathroom 10 times at night, or the birds wake him up. All the daughters of song are brought low. Again, it's deafness. A wonderful one. The almond trees blossom. What in the world does that refer to? What color are the blossoms of almond trees? White. When your hair turns gray and white. It's a really pretty way of saying when you get old and your hair turns gray. It doesn't talk about falling out. But a grasshopper drags itself along. What might that be a reference to? Maybe arthritis. Well, probably you get old and fat and you have trouble walking. A grasshopper drags itself along. Desire fails. What's that about? What do they got a blue pill for that fixes your problem? Both the appetite for sex and the ability for sex fails. So Kohelet, again, he's very practical in here. And it continues moving to the funeral of the persons. Mourners, by the way, were professional criers. Like we'd have a professional caterer come to serve food. They had professional criers to show how important this guy who died was. They come and wail away, and oh my, it's so terrible that he's died. That sounds crazy to us, but think of what we do that would sound crazy to people 2,000 years ago. Lots and lots of stuff. Is this how we think of the aging process now? We recognize the reality of it, but what does entire industries of healthcare and beauty products and magic serums and supplements, how much money a year is generated to keep people younger? So all these things, eyesight, hearing, the ability to walk, your weight management, every arthritis you mentioned, every malady possible, there's a pill or program to try to address, to fend that off. But eventually it happens to everybody. I would say time, trying to buy time. Maybe they're trying to feel young, because everybody knows what he's saying is basically true. You might be really hot as a 75-year-old, but compared to a 25-year-old, sorry, but everybody knows that already, Jeffrey. Yeah, I wonder, out of curiosity, inside, Jeffrey's saying, most of us still feel like teenagers, or even, we think of ourselves in a certain way. Does anybody feel like they're teenagers or in their 20s still?
I'm a
12-year-old?
12-year-old.
I agree with you on that one, Jim. No. When we hit certain ages where we can't do stuff, it's mainly when we look in the mirror, it's like, oh God, I'm not that person anymore. And how people relate to us changes. That's certainly true. But what does Kohelet say all of this is? Vanity. It's all vanity. Verses 6 and 7, before the silver cord is snapped, the golden bowl is broken, the pitcher broken in the fountain, the wheel broken in the cistern. That's your body breaking apart. All of it's vanity, and he describes dying and returning to the dust. And he uses the idea, the breath, the spirit, the Hebrew word is ruach, R-U-A-H, is how we'd write that in English, they all mean the same thing. Breath, spirit, soul even. The life essence that is you is gone. That's the dying part. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. There ends, says the teacher, all is vanity. Full stop. Then you get an epilogue. Besides being wise, the teacher, Kohelet, also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs. The teacher sought to find pleasing words, and he wrote words of truth plainly. I would say a lot of what he says is not terribly plain, but he does a good job. The sayings of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings that are given by one shepherd. Of anything beyond these, my child, beware. So this is, keep it right here, This is the wisdom you should have. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of flesh. There are a lot of books out there. I mean, this was also when it's handwritten. And there's so much information, but this is as good as any. That's what the epilogue is saying. So he basically agrees with what Kohelet said. When, this is it's a complicated question. So as I said, this was written 200-300 years BCE, before the Common Era. Not long after that, the Bible was the Old Testament was canonized, meaning this is now the official standard that we look to for authority. When that happens, you can't change it anymore without really clear things. So we're having all these articles of confederation, everybody's arguing about what should be in there. But once we got the Constitution, you don't change the Constitution. You can have an amendment. That's how it has to be, like this very formal, official way. Similar things happens to the Bible. So at this point, Ecclesiastes is not canon. The first epilogue is added. I want to put in my 2 cents. I agree with him. That's epilogue 1. Then, epilogue 2, different writer. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for that is the whole duty of everyone. Does that sound consistent with anything Kohelet wrote the entire time? Heck no. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. Period. What is that about? Kate?
I think it harkens back to like what I said earlier about verse 9 in Book of 11. This concept of judgment, and that whatever it is you choose to do, wherever on the continuum of good or ill that might fall, it's going to be judged. So
like earlier, whatever you choose to do, good or evil, and whatever continuum, you will be judged. You could also say, you better watch out, or you're going to get a bag of coal in your stocking. It feels kind of like that. And it also, where in all of Ecclesiastes before did the writers say, you should fear God, which of course means to respect with awe God. Fear God most of all. Is that in there in the whole book before? Little bit? Say that again. Nor is good and evil. So you got, the second epilogue brings in, you should fear God, first thing. Good and evil, maybe a little bit, but absolutely not a major theme at all. And he says, keep his commandments. All the 613 laws, the commandments of the Bible. Is that anywhere in Kohelet? Oh no. This is, let me come back and correct him so he fits the party narrative that we're all saying the same thing. Fear God. Oh yeah, right. We agree with it. Absolutely. Keep all the commandments. Absolutely. That's what we're here about, is to keep all those groups, Pharisees, Sadducees, Sanhedrin, etc. All of them agreed we're supposed to follow the commandments. Kohelet is the oddball. He is the extreme of this. He doesn't so much care about that. I mean, kosher? No. Oh, you mean I can't have Gentile women too? No, this is completely different from his experience. And so somebody's come in to clean it up, to make it more palatable to everybody else, because they didn't know what to do with this book either. It falls in the wisdom literature like Proverbs, Ecclesiastes does, but or Job. Oh my God, is that the type of God you really want, that allows the devil to do all these things for a bargain? I'm not sure I like that God very much. Or this guy's saying you should try to get rich and then have wisdom and drink, and all of it's vanity anyway. The law, the commandments are not vanity. That you should do that. So it's a really different thing that's coming here. Steve.
So if they felt that you need to give a correction to Ecclesiastes, why did they still include it as canon?
It's a great question. Why do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if the powers that be
It's a great question. There are many similar things. Quite a few books, you'll see them advertised as this was a secret gospel of Jesus or this was suppressed. They knew all about it at the time. It was so inconsistent with, say, the other gospels, they just chose not to. There are other things you could say in any given community, and say, like in this case, the larger Jewish community, particularly the rabbis. I mean, the rabbis were the ones making the decision. This was not a vote of all the people. This was a vote of a particular group. Similar to, you could say, the earliest American, when they're making up the laws, they chose certain things. We're going to base it on English common law. We're going to look back to Rome and even Greece and some of these ideas, but modify them and fit for us. They decided what it would be for everybody else. That's going on. There's not one answer to that. The best likely answer is enough people had read this book, it had circulated enough that it became kind of the common wisdom that everybody knew as a touch point. We can't get rid of it, but somebody came along with Epilogue 2 and churched it up a bit, cleaned it up, and at that point, right after that, then it was included in the canon. After that, you can't change it anymore. So it's the odd thing of you have Epilogue 1, Epilogue 2, then it becomes official, and that's what we got. Why didn't they just get rid of the last two things? Because they had inherited that, and that's very, very important, particularly in that culture. We talked about this in Genesis some, or even New Testament. Some things in the Bible were not written by Paul, but claimed by Paul. Or they make references to things, or they, what we'd call directly plagiarize. They didn't see it that way. They viewed it as honoring the past, and that's how something gets authority, and that's how you honor what went before it. It gives it credibility. And so keeping all that, the epilogues, simply happened because of the timing of that, and they kept it in most likely because enough people had read it and become accepted even though they didn't like it. How many things are in your life that you don't necessarily like, that you prefer, but that's just what you inherited? I would do Rite 1 at one service. I much prefer Rite 1 to Rite 2. I inherited 3 Rite 2 services. Do I want to come in and say, I know what was done here, but I have a preference for this. I think this is better, so I should do that. No, that'd be, in my opinion, stupid as a rector. Why would I change what everybody else likes? That said, on Wednesdays, Nancy comes on Wednesdays, when we get to the Eucharist part to celebrate, what do I ask people? Yeah. What do you want to do today? Sue, what do I say?
What do you want to do?
What service do you want to celebrate today? Prayer A, B, C, D. C. Oh, God, I got to look at that one. I don't know it. Or A or B. I let people choose. And so every once in a while, I'll go in and say, hey, do you all mind if we do Rite 1 because it fits the readings? Oh, no, that's fine. That's a better way to do it than just, I want this, and so I'm demanding it. I think they were kind of stuck with it at a certain point, is another way to phrase it. There's some really good parts in there. Is this consistent with the Christian, broadly universal or Catholic Christian view of the world? Why not?
Because it's neurotic.
It's neurotic. I hadn't thought of that, but that's a good description.
You and your little worries, and it's not either upward or outward directed.
Yeah. It's very individualistic, centered, which is strange for the whole Hebrew, which is community all over and over and over.
I just think it was kind of nihilistic.
It's nihilistic.
Yeah. I mean, it just rejects everything. Like,
Nihilistic, it rejects everything. Would you call, anybody here call Ecclesiastes hopeful? I would say big fat no to that one. Something you'd want to teach your children. It's like Poor Richard's Almanac.
penny saved is a penny earned, early to bed, early to rise. I mean, okay.
There's some nice stuff in there, but it's not hopeful. It's not dealing with life's problems ends up being none of it matters anyway. Havel havalim, all is vanity, all is vapor. Enjoy it while you got it, because you might lose it all. You will lose it all. Your health, your looks, your money, and that's all vanity too, so enjoy that. And then you get old and die. Did I miss something? That's pretty much it. So the Christian, and this is part of why Philippians is so great, offers a completely different vision for the world in four short chapters. Steve?
But to me, it's not all that different from one of the epistles. I'm sorry, I don't know which one. It says, don't dwell on earthly things. Isn't that what this is saying? All that you're doing, that's only earthly pleasures. Don't worry about it.
That is a very good point, and bring that up next week, because I want us to talk about a sense of duality that is often present, particularly in the epistles, of earthly, worldly things. Like Deanna mentioned that last week, of bodily things versus spiritual things, heavenly and earthly. There is absolutely a dichotomy that is there in some places, but that's a more, interestingly, Paul Greek Christian idea than it is a Jewish idea. Any last things about Ecclesiastes? 12 chapters was pretty much enough. I'm ready to be done with it. But thank you all very much.